and welcome to KnightHunter Books. We might have gone book shopping at the weekend and bought quite a few books. So, on the plus side, we thought that's something fun to show you.
And we got it all done before foils flooded in London, so that was handy.
Yes, plus sides. We're going to each talk about half of the books, but by no means is that the clean split of exactly who will be reading these books.
No.
We all read each other's books, that's fine.
My first book is The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. You might know Ken Liu from his short work. He won a Hugo a couple of years ago, or maybe last year, with The Paper Menagerie, which is really good. This is an epic fantasy, which I don't know a huge amount about, if I'm completely honest, but it looks like there's some steampunky elements and rebellion against the status quo. So, enough to get me interested, especially with Ken's name attached, so give that a go.
So the first book I'm going to talk about is Who Fears Death by Nnedi Okorafor. You might have seen her name around attached to other books, like Lagoon was quite big last year, and also Book of Phoenix, which I think has been around BookTube a bit at the moment, and we read this month, we'll have a review up as well.
Yep.
So honestly, yeah, I just picked up this book because of the author and the fact that it is a sequel, although written earlier than the Book of Phoenix, which I really liked. So I was really interested to read more about that world. It is set in post-apocalyptic Africa and follows a young girl, I think, who is a bit of an outcast from her society and someone is trying to kill her. So there's a mystery element there. Sounds kind of fun.
My next one is Hunter by Mercedes Lackey, and this one I know is fun because I bought it at the weekend and I've already finished it. I think I read it in one evening. It's a YA, it's really fast paced, it's a stable, prosperous, post-apocalyptic world with monsters and magic.
And it's got my name on it.
Always good. I think the second in this series is already out, so I will almost certainly end up picking up that.
The next book I'm going to talk about is The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu, which is a Chinese science fiction story translated by Ken Liu, who wrote the first book that John showed. This has made quite a splash recently. I think it won the Hugo last year. It's first in a trilogy and it's been incredibly popular in China for quite some time now, but only just translated. Some of the things it mentions on the back are virtual reality and conspiracies and that sort of thing. And I think this is one that we'll probably both pick up quite soon. So.
Yes.
And the other two are also translated and now available in the UK.
My next one is Europe in Autumn by Dave Hutchinson, and this was a Clark Award shortlisted this year. One of the ones I've not got around to reading. This is the tale of a people smuggler in a near future, fractured, decaying Europe that is home of 1,000 microstates that pop up and then collapse. Hopefully it's not too predictive.
The next book I'm going to talk about is The Book of the Unnamed Midwife by Meg Ellison, which I picked up because you put it in my hand. Because this book is another post-apocalyptic. There might be a trend. This one sounds quite dark though from the back. There is a fever or an illness which kills women during childbirth. So there's a lack of children and a lack of women in this world.
And a lack of future in that case.
Yeah, so a bit depressing. Not much hope. This follows a midwife who probably doesn't have very much of a job left, or at least a very depressing one, and she actually ends up dressing up like a man, I think, for much of the story. It's as a way to get around. It's won the Philip K. Dick Award, and it's quite a new one out, so hopefully I'll try and get to this while it's still quite fresh.
An unusual one for me now, in that it's literary fiction about quite a depressing subject. This would normally be one of yours. But I'd seen it in Waterstones quite a few times and I was intrigued and...
You happened to be buying another book that was also on the same offer.
Yeah. So, yeah, £4 worth a throw. And it looked intriguing. I've already looked at the first few pages and it is, as you'd expect, quite different to what I normally read, so it should make quite a nice change. Quite lyrical, bits of it in verse. It's about a widowed man with two young sons And as it says, grief is a thing with feathers that turns up and dominates their life for a while.
Ooh, cheery.
Yeah, sounds it.
So now we come on to some of my lighter reads that I picked up. The rest of my haul is quite YA and chick lit heavy, mostly because I realised that I'd already read all of those kinds of books that I had on my TBR shelf and was left only with the more heavy books, so I thought I needed to restock.
Who knew the fun books go first?
I know. So this is Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Elias Sains. This book follows two boys who I think are described as being very different to each other as they get to know each other and develop a friendship. The fact that this has won some LGBTQ awards makes me think it might become more than friendship, but I don't think that's a spoiler. It's also won quite a few other awards as well, and is just generally pretty well regarded, and I've seen a lot around it at BookTube, so looking forward to see what I think of this.
My next one is Hild by Nicola Griffith. This is one that I didn't know much about when I picked it up, though I remembered having known more about it in the past. So seen it a lot discussed online and
at Ninewells last year.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's about a young woman who enters the royal court.
And when you say court, you mean like, historic court, not fantasy court. So 7th century Britain?
Yes. And it's all about the angles and all that sort of stuff. And she makes something of a splash at court because she can make startlingly accurate predictions. Whether because she's the only person with a working brain or because of magic, I don't know. But it should be an interesting one to pick up.
It's longer than it looks. I'm tempted myself, but it is over 600 pages and I'm more of a short book person.
And it's a tiny font.
Next I have a book by Rainbow Rowell. This one's Eleanor and Park, which is one of her YA stories. Rainbow Rowell is an author I started reading this year, and everything I've read by her I've really enjoyed and had a lot of fun with. So I figured I'll just buy the rest of her work and see what I think of that too. So this one is kind of boy meets girl in high school in America, I think. Both outcasts. So quite typical contemporary setting, but I'd be interested to see what she does with it.
Doesn't sound as obviously funny as Fangirl, which had you cackling like a loon on the sofa. My next one was an instant purchase before I even read the back. This is Pocket Apocalypse by Shauna Maguire. Now, Shauna Maguire's had quite a lot of mentions recently on BookTube because of this. In Every Heart a Doorway, a Tor.com novella, which I've already read. And this is a new entry in Shonan's Encrypted series, which is somewhere between urban fantasy and modern pulp. And it follows a family who study and try and manage supernatural beasties and try and stop them interfering too much with humanity and vice versa.
And you've read quite a few of her other works in that series as well, haven't you?
So there's already an existing 3 books in this series. This is the 4th. And I've also read some of her other work. She also writes under the pen name Myra Grant. So there's quite a lot of her work about. She's an incredibly prolific author.
Feed and Parasite and horror.
Yes.
Next is another Rainbow Rowell book, Landline, and this one is, I don't think it should be YA, but we did find it in the YA section. The main character is a middle-aged woman in a failing marriage who her telephone becomes magical and she's able to call her husband before they were even married. And I think it sounds like there's a few questions in here about can she fix their marriage before they start to kind of fall apart from each other? Is that a sensible thing to do? Yeah, it sounds a bit different. It sounds contemporary, but there's definitely a magical thing in there.
Yeah.
I very much doubt it explains how that magical telephone works, but we will find out.
My next purchase was The Revenge of Eli Monpress by Rachel Aaron. and this was another impulse purchase without reading the back. Apparently I have a problem with impulse purchases.
That's because you've read all of the authors already.
With the exception of 2. So this is a second in a series of omnibuses, which cover the follow the adventures of a magic wielding thief in a high fantasy universe. They're really good fun. If you like Scott Lynch's Gentleman Bastard series, but maybe a little less gritty and a little more funny, I think, than that, and I suppose slightly sort of shinier high fantasy. I'm fully expecting to laugh myself silly at this one.
And the final book that I have is Sherman Alexie's The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. I say last book, we have graphic novels too. This is another YA story following a Native American boy who is a cartoonist who wants to go to the school which is almost entirely white and I think make a name for himself there. I don't really know much of what this is about, but it sounds like there's a bit of grappling with destiny and trying to work out which way he wants to go with his future. And yeah, it's from a different voice than I've read before, so I'm really looking forward to that. And should be hopefully a light one.
My next one is Trees Volume 2 by Warren Ellis and Jason Howard, and this is the second in a series covering a world after the aliens came. The aliens came 10 years ago and they don't recognise us as intelligent or even alive. The only present sign of them is 2 mile high trees that are scattered about the globe randomly, and people behave oddly under this sort of permanent shadow. It's witty, brutal, and I've already read it.
Yes.
So I'll try and avoid doing a review. If you like Warren Ellis, you'll like this. If you don't, I'm not sure this is a perfect entry point to his work, but it's certainly good fun.
Certainly being a second volume.
True.
And the next graphic novel we picked up was Nimona by Noelle Stevenson, who I've seen her name around quite a lot. She's been involved with lots of comics, one of them in particular Lumberjanes, which I've also tried.
Yeah.
So she's got quite a fun style. I think she's the sole creator for this work. So this follows a sidekick to a supervillain, which...
Supers universe?
I think fantasy supers universe. And it sounds like it's trying to be quite subversive. I think they're trying to reveal that the good guys aren't maybe as good as everyone thinks they are. Which sounds like a pretty fun premise to me.
The next graphic novel we've got is Volume 1 of Amulet by Keizu Kubushi. And this follows the adventures of 2 kids and their magically animated rabbit as they attempt to retrieve their mother, the children's mother, after she's been kidnapped by some tentacular horror. It should be an interesting read. I've already flicked through the first few pages, and it gets you going and immediately makes you start feeling for the characters, which is what you're after. So it should be quite a nice light break after some of the heavier stuff.
With tentacular horrors.
Well, tentacular horrors are a nice break from sort of existential angsts.
And the final thing we have to show you is Bitch Planet by DeConnick Delandro and Wilson IV Peter Cowles. So the setting for this is a patriarchal dystopia by the sounds of it.
The patriarchocalypse?
Yeah, I like that. So everything's gone a bit wrong for women. We join a group of women just as they are being sent to a prison planet, and we get to see how they get along there. I haven't read this yet, so I don't know much more than that. But it sounds like it's got loads of kick-ass characters, and I think we've seen quite a bit of buzz about it online.
I've already seen people with tattoos of NC which stands for non-compliant, which
Yeah.
all the women get sent to the prison planet with.
Yeah.
So, if you've read any of these, obviously we've got quite a TBR to get through now, so if you've read any of these and can recommend them, things you think we should read first, feel free to pitch in the comments. Any that you think we've bought that were a horrible, horrible mistake.
Maybe keep that to yourself.
Or maybe just take bets on what we're going to end up sending to the charity shop.